While recording is in progress, and this is Andrew Williams Jr. Thank you for joining us for another conversation with Andrew Williams Jr. Let me share my screen this moment, please. And we're going to do a Hollywood two-over. This is Andrew Williams Jr. and another Conversations with Andrew Williams Jr. Today we're broadcasting from Concord, Massachusetts, and we're having Concordian conversations with Stuart Sinclair Weeks, who is here.
So thank you and welcome, friends. I'm going to turn my phone through a rainy car window shield to the Emerson home called the Bush, the home of Ralph Waldo Emerson, the sage of Concord. And Ralph Waldo Emerson was pretty much the major lecturer of his day. He was pretty much the major voice of the day on the lecture circuit in the lyceums. There were many others remarkable figures, but he was considered really the premier speaker. And we're going to go into that a little bit. What that was about. The topic for this conversation I have with me our esteemed guest from Hampton, Virginia, Calvin Pearson, who has taken on telling this true story of his African and African-American brothers and sisters in terms of the history. So he'll be chiming in and out of these conversations, and then there'll be some presentations he'll be making himself. And I have my brother, Andrew, as well. But a real go. This is a vernacular. What does it take in life to really make it easy, but to walk the talk, not to labor under a curse, not to moan and groan? Remember that we are defeated when we forget we are on the other side. We, the people, are defeated. I would suggest, this is simply me speaking, an Emersonian, when we forget we're on the same side, and that it's the agenda of the powers to be to turn us against one another, to use everything they can to turn us against one another, black, white, Christian, Jew, male, female, whatever they can exploit to turn us against each other so that we are defeated because we forget that we, the people, are on the same side. So that's what we're focusing in the Emerson spirit here. And in the schedule, I quote Emerson, and I'll be quoting him a number of times, who says, and this is Dr. King actually was quoting him in his address, Anecdotes to Fear. He considered Emerson and Thoreau to be two of his main teachers, mentors, inspirers. So he quoted Emerson, who said, "He who has not, who has not each day surmounted a fear. He has not learned the lessons of life, who has not each day surmounted a fear." Emerson also said, "We wish to be settled, but our salvation lies in being unsettled." Our salvation, our very salvation, lies in being unsettled. Friends, have we the ears to hear such words? What does it take to make a difference? I asked this question to my second son, who early on was running one of America's major campaign finance organizations. So he was working with Bill Bradley, Carries and Simpsons of the world. He was young and he was very enthused. He was gung-ho. He was bent and determined, Daniel was, to reform our campaign finance system. And I said to him, to support him, I said, Daniel, that's great, but I offer you a question. And that question is, what do you think it would actually take, not just to talk about? I encouraged him to consider the biography of that person who accomplished that goal, who actually reformed our campaign finance system. And I say, can you imagine that biography might read like the biography of Gandhi or King, both of whom offered up their own last full measuration, who did the same? In other words, are we willing not just to talk the talk, but to walk it, to walk it? Emerson is seen as the stately sage of Concord, but he didn't start out that way. He shared one coat with his older brother. His father died when he was young. And he proceeded to lose pretty much everybody in life that he loved. 5 siblings. He dared to fall in love with a woman after all those losses. He spoke of his siblings as his star-bright companions. He lost them. He dared to fall in love with a woman, dear Ellen. And a few months after they were married, she was coughing up blood. She would offer up her spirit, leading Emerson to say, I am defeated all the time, yet to victory I am born. I'm defeated all the time, yet one could replace Ellen, Lydian, and they brought forth a child in the world, little Waldo, but only for a couple of years. It wasn't long before Waldo lifted his wings. Emerson's heart was broken again and again and again and again and again. Next, it would be his beloved friend, Henry David Thoreau, and then his audience, Margaret Fuller. And again, I'm defeated all the time, yet to victory I am born. And he spoke about how it is creative activity that surmounts these trials and tribulations, this decay. I've come to see Emerson's wisdom as what I call the resurrection wisdom. That is, he had so many experiences of death that he had no choice but to find life, renewed life. Leonard Cohen writes, ring the bell that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. It gets in through our cracks, friends. So I have a bit more to say about Emerson, but I want to invite, I don't expect Andrew or Calvin, you necessarily to pick up on this thread, but I don't give you, if you want to comment at all, King and Antidotes to Fear, stating, quoting Emerson, who said, he has not learned the lessons of life, who has not each day surmounted a fear. Or Emerson's words, we wish to be settled, but our salvation lies in being unsettled. As my Black brothers, if we look superficially outwardly, how do these words speak to you? I'm going to pass it first to Andrew on my right, and Andrew, you can offer a word or pass it to Calvin, and I will carry on afterwards.
Well, thank you for sharing this opportunity. However, I'm not as familiar with the context in which Martin Luther King said those words. So for me, it would be helpful if you could share with me where these words were said during a speech, or can you tell me what context they had, Stuart?
Yeah, I believe I may have mentioned that, Andrew, from his sermon, Antidotes to Fear. was a sermon he gave in which he was offering to those who are listening antidotes to fear. And he quoted therein Emerson's words, "He has not learned the lessons of life, who has not each day surmounted, risen above a fear, which begins first by facing it squarely," I would suggest.
Oh, yes, that certainly does bring it into context. And yes, I can certainly understand how that would be very relevant to Dr. King, who, as most people who know anything about him knew, that he, in fact, had to surmount his fear of death, which he spoke about in a very moving way. And it also speaks to my particular life, and that, longevity is good. Longevity is good, but what are you doing with the value of your time and your life? And I understand that quote to mean for him, it's not complacency, it's not standing still, it's not being comfortable in what you're comfortable with, but instead find a way each day to grow and to grow beyond your fears. So that speaks to me personally, but I believe this is a lesson that is applicable worldwide. That's my first take on it, Stuart Sinclair Weeks.
Thank you very much. Calvin, anything you wish to say at this point?
I'm Galvin Pearson, founder of Project 1619 Incorporated in Hampton, Virginia. I agree with the quote about fear. You've got to challenge life in order to learn. But involve me and I will learn. So his philosophy was to be involved in what was going on around you is the best way to learn. But we go back and look at some of his statements and his philosophies in Concord. He was also, responsible for his own actions, combining nature and all the other things and God and everything else together. That the individual person was the person in charge of their destiny. So there was a lot of things about Ralph Emerson that people are still trying to analyze some of his comments and quotes from many years ago. So I think that he wanted people to learn that you can only learn by making mistakes. Step out. You never learn your successes and your failures in life. And his position was that we as people, as individuals, we need to step out. Sometimes step out in faith, but sometimes that you've got to step out and take on challenges and take on things that sometimes can be painful to you, but in the end there'll be a learning process in everything that you do. And I think that's pretty much what he was trying to say by that statement.
Beautiful, Calvin. Thank you very much. So I want to come to a part of Emerson's life and labors that I think, brings us to the heart of who he was this time around. That time around. And that is, he said, when the abolition issue became sort of a cause celebrate that involved, as with Black Lives Matter today, who are talking the talk, but he wondered how many were really walking it. And he was pressed one that, in my eyes, at least, brings us to the heart of the matter. And that is, he said, I have slaves my own to attend to. If I don't attend to them, nobody else will. Once again, I have slaves of my own to attend to. If I don't attend to them, nobody else. And that is, there's this lovely expression that goes around about how it's an inside job. That, can I suggest that if one really wishes to get to the root of the matter, one has to go below the surface. So when Emerson says, I have slaves of my own, to heart of it, what is it that leads to slavery? What is it in the human heart and mind that leads to slavery? I'm going to share some words by Hawthorne that speaks to this. What is it that allows us to come into the world? What spell who see beyond that? Little children, lovely to see little children in mixed classes before they're educated otherwise fully in terms of Emerson, but I do like to keep the conversation going. So I'm going to pass the phone to Andrew again and to Calvin, and invite them, if they wish, to comment further on this question of how do we get the job done? What does it take to really make a difference?
This conversation, however, I would have to suggest that the comment may have been one that Emerson intended to be reflective to a great degree, and that the consideration at that time in his life that he was focused on seemingly involved those with, in his particular viewpoint, a much greater priority than the fact that the question is one that causes the hearer to reflect on their own focus and their own interests and even perhaps the actual meaning of slavery itself, and whether that's something limited to the slavery that was being talked about or whether it reflects challenges. So those would be my questions to you, Stuart Sinclair Weeks, before you pass it back to Calvin Pearson.
Well, thank you. I have plenty to say, but I'm
Type of individual. He agreed in individual rights, individualism, but yet he care his enslaved people, that it was somebody else's job, but it was legal. There was not a whole lot of recourse that enslaved people had at that time. Text of what he was talking about at that present time. I think that's a general discussion that he felt a personal responsibility, that it was up to him to take, or anybody, or leave it up to
have to learn, or maybe it's something that's been misrepresented, individualism, and then respond to what Andrew asked of me here. And that is in his essay, Self-Reliance. There's a very interesting passage where he speaks to this idea of individualism or self-reliance. And he says words to the effect, I mean, when you talk about self-reliance, the obvious question arises, well, what are you relying on? What are you yourself relying on? And he's well aware of the critiques. And in his essay, Self-Reliance, he says, a valued advisor said to me, challenging his notion of self-reliance, what happens if the self you're relying upon is the devil, which is certainly impossible. And Emerson very clearly, he says, I don't think it is. He doesn't say it isn't. He knows well that he's not omniscient. He says, I don't think it is, but he says, if the devil's son I am, then the devil's son I'll be. And what I think he means by that is if we don't rely on our own self, and who's going to bat 1,000? Self, if we don't rely on our own self. And this is the point he's making, is that we really have no choice but to strive to be self-reliant. And the question is whether we're on our toes enough to be aware of the self that we are relying upon. Is it the lower self, simply expressed, or is it our higher self? In the scriptures, the words are not I, but Christ in me. So do those who criticize Emerson's self-reliance, and I'm not suggesting that Calvin has done that, I think he's focusing a very important question of individualism. What is the relation of the individual to the society? I don't think there's an alternative to self-reliance. Who would want to be part of a society with a lot of selves and are not relying on themselves, but on some dictator like a Hitler or whoever it may be, truly reliant. So I'm going to go to the second comment, but first invite any responses from Andrew and Calvin on that statement of mine.
Well, first, let me clarify the fact that Emerson did not own slaves, but in the context of your statement that he has slaves of his own to consider, I accepted at face value that he did own slaves. It's just now that I'm doing research, which is easily available on this particular resource, just Wikipedia. But in fact, according to the information here, that it was here in Concord, Massachusetts, on May 3rd of 1851, that Emerson denounced this Fugitive Slave Act. He went on to say that the act of Congress is a law which every one of you will break on the earliest occasion, a law which no man can obey or abet the obeying without loss of self-respect and forfeiture of the name of a gentleman. That summer, he wrote in his diary, this filthy enactment was made in the 19th century by people who could read and write. I will not obey it. So in speaking to what I can understand here, it may again be, as I suggested in the first place, not so much a matter of him describing his necessity to pay attention to the management and welfare of his own slaves, literally, although that may be the case. It seemed to me that the slaves that he was addressing were either symbolic or had other meanings than the physical, actual fact of it.
So Andrew, thank you. And I'm going to, well, let me just make a quick point and I'll give it to you, Calvin, gladly. I realize that my words are misunderstood. When I said Emerson said I have slaves of my own to attend to, he was not referring to outer slaves, and he wasn't referring to black men or women. He was responding with respect to the slave issue. He was saying that there are inner battles that need to be fought, and that's where they begin. And we can get preoccupied and get involved in all the outer causes, but unless we're addressing the inner matters, we're not going to have much success. So he didn't jump into the abolition issue people did who are looking for a cause. He did step into it, and he, as Andrew said, and he spoke up very clearly. He waited until he inwardly was poised, and then he spoke. Very powerful.
Quick fact check. When you look at a quote, you got to take it for its face value. And when he said he had to look out after his slaves, and that's why I said earlier, what he was talking about at the time. So, again, I took his quote to be face value, but so I'm glad he didn't own people, because they said he was an abolitionist. So why would it have been our lives that we must conquer? Um, Personally, I wouldn't call them slaves, or I'd call it for what it is. Whether we're fighting racism, economic.
Calvin, thank you. And let me repeat my apology that given more context, because as I live into your thinking, I can see that someone who doesn't know Emerson as well, and there are answers to that question. And he gave the answers to the question. One reason he did was because everybody else was writing in a clear outer way. So there was plenty of that kind of clarity. But more deeply, the reasons why he didn't write in a way, and literally he would write an essay in Gobu, was not easily understood inner effort. I'm not referring at all to Calvin's comments, not in the least. But we tend to want things quick, rather superficial, straight up. There's merit to that for certain things, but there are certain other things that are not things, but spiritual realities that aren't going to be grasped that way. They can't be explained that way. They can't be understood that way. The reader has to make an inner effort in order to grasp what's being conveyed. And Emerson wrote in such a way that those readers who weren't prepared or able to make that effort wouldn't read on, because half-truths are more dangerous, some say, than lies. What he had to offer, which, as Harvard professor Stanley Cavell said, one of the great philosophers, he said, Emerson connects us with our own best thoughts, which largely we've abandoned, maybe that live in Christ's words, his new commandment, love one another. That Emerson connects us with our own best thoughts. And that takes an effort, because it's easy to be drawn out into life and to live superficially, to make hasty judgments, to make critical judgments, to point fingers, to labor under a curse. And that just leads to dividing and conquering. Emerson was trying to convey something else. And it wasn't meant for those who weren't prepared to make the inner effort to grasp it. And those who could, they came to their true selves, I would suggest, in every single word he wrote, because he was offering us a resurrection wisdom, because his heart was broken over and over and over and over again. A father, 5 siblings, one's beloved wife, one's beloved child, one's closest friends. Ring the bell that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in through our broken hearts. And parenthetically, I can speak from experience, as some may detect in the tone of my words. But be that as it may, the second reason why Emerson wrote the way he did was that he didn't want to be put up on a pedestal. If he wrote in a way that was more challenging, people would be less awed, and those who got the message would know it's not about Emerson, but it's about themselves. So he didn't want to be put up on a pedestal. And he wrote in such a way that it would ensure that he was not put up on a pedestal. Which, Andrew, goes to our earlier conversation about titles, about names, about the whole and the part, about the oak and the acorn, about how we represent ourselves. So I'm going to pass the phone around and to ask my brothers here if this further glimpse of Emerson and his resurrection wisdom makes more sense who this individual was in that lifetime. Because if we have an immortal soul and spirit, as Dr. King alludes to very movingly in the beginning of his last speech, I've been to the mountaintop. He takes us through his earlier lives, perhaps in the beginning of that speech, journeying through history. We're speaking about Emerson in this one lifetime. So Andrew and Calvin, if the spirit moves, you have anything to comment on what's been said thus far? I welcome your thoughts.
Oh, again, this is Andrew Williams Jr. I'm tempted to say no, but as my brother suggests, sometimes no is just another way of saying oh. So in the context of oh, the entire conversation about Emerson, and in fact, the location where we are right now in Concord, Massachusetts, is, as Stuart mentioned, not just the home of what they claim is the first shot heard around the world, which was at the excuse me, in Concord. Although, of course, my own research, when I heard that phrase, took me to the Boston Massacre and the Christmas Addicts death being the first shot heard around the world. Much like that, I'm faced with here now again, and dealing with this concept of Emerson and the slaves that he's has to deal with and contend with. I've had an opportunity to just, as Stuart was reading and Calvin was talking, to give it much more thought and much more appreciation of the fact that this place, Concord, Massachusetts, is again the center of the center of the center of not just what could be called the American evolution, but also transcendentalism itself. In that context, it would seem that Emerson is making an urgent effort to demonstrate or to be the most ideal methodology of conveying to others the meaning that he himself was able to experience. Again, from the standpoint of what I now hear being called transcendentalism, and also speaks to the fact that I have had recently wrestled with the concept of the important spiritual transcendence, or the transcendence of the spirit, sound of my voice, on this earth, but also those ancestors that preceded me, and those who many are able to connect with and who give appreciation to and respect to. Even in the African traditions, when libations are offered, and the idea is that you're giving a recognition and appreciation, not just to the people physically there. When older people in our family would say to a younger person that had just been born or had some earlier characteristics of someone that they had known previously. So the whole idea of transcendentalism now through Emerson's word it becomes more relevant, and it also causes us to, I think, pause a bit and give further consideration to this reality that we're walking.
Session by reading two passages. First, I alluded to by Harvard professor Stanley Cavell about Emerson and about our times. In his Iona College address, Stanley writes, this was a graduation address. This is the most happy occasion for me, and I do not wish to mar it by speaking about unhappy things. But I will not belittle it by speaking of anything less than what matters most to me is No muse can these impart, throb thine with nature's throbbing breast. In all its clear, from east to west.
Well, thank you, Sinclair Weeks. But the great news is that Hollywood, because we restore our connection and we are streaming in. So for those that you may now repeat your entire package and ensure the audience hanging on our every word for the last 45 minutes.
Okay, so who shall I speak to you here?
Just a moment, please. I'm going to give you the here. So now, yes, you can speak your audience.
So we're once again in the car with rain outside in front of the Emerson home, the Bush in Concord, Massachusetts. And I ended our session this morning.
Oh, I don't. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sure. That sound. Yes, go ahead. I apologize. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Andrew Williams Jr. We're in a multiple presentation here at Concord, Massachusetts, and we're sharing with you this information that you can find on our Facebook page that you so choose. But we're going to do a Hollywood do-over. So Stuart Sinclair Weeks is going to introduce this poem and he's going to walk you through it. Thank you so much.
So we're concluding this session we've just done at the Emerson House, Ralph Waldo Emerson, called The Bush in Concord. We had I think a very